Welcome to PayPod, the show that features thought-provoking interviews with leaders and entrepreneurs in the payments and financial technology industries. From credit card processing to Bitcoin, we cover it all. So if you want to know what's happening right now in the payments industry, stay tuned. Now, here's your host, Scott Hawksworth.
Hey, how's it going, PayPod listeners? We're back with another episode all about the payments industry. And this week, we're actually going to be looking at things from a high level with a more global focus. And joining me to share his vast experience and thoughts on all of this is Faisal Khan. Faisal is a bankings and payments consultant, a cross-border money transfer specialist, financial technology podcast co-host, a Fintech scout for VCs, and so much more. So needless to say, he has a lot of great insight into payments. And you can learn more about him by visiting his site, faisalkhan.com. Faisal, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Well, to start us off, can you give us just a brief overview of your career? How did you get into banking and payments consulting?
Sure. For about 18 years, I ran a company that was in IT specializations, for banking and commercial companies were our clients. And after 18 years of, waking up at 4 a.m. because the server was down or some email was not working or some application server was crashed,
Sure,
I had enough. So when I turned 40, I essentially went back and, just like a factory getting retooled after every 20 years, I decided to get retooled. I decided to change my field and go into payments and banking. So at the age of 40, after 18 years of doing IT and tech, I went back to the books, hit the books for a year, took a sabbatical, and came into the world of banking and payments.
Wow. So it was just like a complete shift and going on to a completely new path. I love it.
Yep. I call it, people say, well, what'd you do? I said, I did 170. They say, oh, you mean a 180? I said, well, no, I was already 10 degrees facing that way, so we did a 170.
For sure. Now, your clients include Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies, banks, transglobal multinationals, and small to medium financial services institutions. Can you share a bit about what you help your clients achieve? What sort of consulting do you offer?
Sure. As you mentioned, I do cross-border. So there are two entities, the sending country and the receiving country. And a sending country, you have things like, the company or the person sending it, their banks, compliance, licensing, IT, KYC, risk, registries, identification, escrow. I mean, there's so many facets to it. And likewise, there's a parallel facet of all these facets in the receiving country. So clients come to me, either they're missing, licensing, or they want regulatory coverage, or they want a certain bank to do a certain type of processing. Sometimes clients come to me missing the entire value chain and say, hey, we're not just missing a couple of links here, we're missing the entire chain. Can you help put it together for us? And that's what I do. I help negotiate or broker all those missing pieces so that they can have a complete end-to-end solution.
That's awesome. And obviously it is so complex, especially when you're dealing with different countries and things like that. So I can imagine there's a lot to sort through from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
So now you also host a podcast. Can you tell us just a little bit about it?
Sure. I write a lot. And one of the websites I write on is Quora, Quora. It's like a question and answer website. And I had two of my fellow Quorans. We all used to write about payments, and we decided, hey, why don't we do a podcast? So 3 years ago, we got on the mic, all three of us, Brian, Mike, and myself, and we started something called Around the Coin. The very first show we did, we had maybe 5 listeners, one from each of their households and probably 3 from mine. Now, after 3 years, we have a little over almost about 20,000 listeners.
Wow.
We were on a 3-month break this summer, and we go back live this weekend. And it's been an amazing journey. And I can tell you one thing, the relationships, the friendships, the avenues that have opened up just because of hosting a podcast have been amazing. It is definitely worth the patience and the time we put in.
Absolutely. Hey, that's why I'm doing this right now. I think it's great. And it's so great to hear about a success story like your show. We're not quite there yet, but we're still pretty young. So we're working on it.
Well, persistency is the key here.
Yes, absolutely. When it comes to podcasting, I have heard is that, it's all about keeping it going and making sure you're publishing your episodes and all of that. Absolutely. So now today, though, we want to talk about the payments industry at a more global level. And, you have spoken about the fragmented world of payments in conferences and elsewhere around the world. Can you discuss this fragmentation and what opportunities there are because of that?
Sure. Give or take, if we look at the world, there are about 220 sovereign countries and nations.
Mm-hmm.
If banking were to be considered a payment system, just a payment network, there are about 1,900 payment systems in the world. So if you ask of those 1,900 payment systems, how many of them are connected on a single hop basis? The answer is less than 1%. If you ask how many are connected on a two hop basis, the answer is less than 3%. So if you wanted to send money from, let's say, M-Pesa into the Japanese banking system, you can't. If you want to do from Bcash in Bangladesh to Bolito in Brazil, you can't. If you want to do from Venmo on to, let's say, Kiwi in Russia, you can't. So these are all the kind of hops, even single hops or double hops, that simply do not allow you to transfer money. But here's the cool thing: we can do this for data, for email, for 220 countries and nations. We cannot do it for money. The obvious reason is standardization, and herein comes the problem. Whose standard do we adopt? Do we adopt the Chinese? Would the US government agree to that? Most likely not. Would the US government standard be agreed on to by Iran? Obviously not. Would the Russians be okay with it? So I don't think so. We'll have a payment standard. However, we will have many standards, but with the hopes that they will be able to talk to each other very seamlessly, and hopefully this fragmentation that exists currently will not exist later on.
Right. So it's not about trying to get one standard that everybody gets on, because that's a pipe dream.
It is. It is. It's a geopolitical issue, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. But if we can use technology and tools to make it so we accept that, okay, this is a built-in thing, we're not all going to be on the same thing, but if we can at least have the communication there and have them all work together, then that's the win, right?
It is. And I think in the broader context, if you look at, let's say, the Canadians agreeing to a certain payment standard amongst all the Canadian institutions that basically bring every payment or non-banking or banking institution in Canada connected to a standard, then all we need to do is we need to work with that Canadian standard, and hence we can connect into entire Canada. Likewise, I feel that companies are trying to make standards. Certain verticals will come on them. For example, all the oil companies in the world will use a certain payment standard. All the travel companies in the world will use a certain payment standard. All the commercial banking or merchant banking banks will use a commercial standard. And then there will be standards or protocols that will connect all these disparate systems together. A classical case in point is Ripple making something called the ILP, which is the intra-ledger protocol, which allows different ledgers to talk to each other. So I think it's something like that is definitely going to pop up.
Absolutely. Now, most of our listeners are based in the US and they're familiar with the industry here. And obviously, it's all more complex than we have time for. But can you give us a brief overview of maybe some of the things that are different or notable about fintech in places like, Asia and elsewhere around the world when compared to the US? If someone is interested in cross-border payments, what things might they want to keep in mind if they're in the US?
The knee-jerk reaction would be, United States lags on something like this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many reasons for it. It's not because the US is lazy. The US is a very, very huge monster. It's not the 800-pound gorilla, it's the 800,000-pound gorilla. So the turning radius is,
Right.
is much larger, right? But the plain and simple answer is legacy. Many of these companies and countries, companies that are implementing solutions in countries like South Asia, don't have to work with a legacy system. The rails are very, very new. Hence, they have the flexibility and the adaptability to bring faster payments, connect everything else, and so forth. The United States and UK and Canada and most of Europe has to look at legacy payment systems and what to do with it. How do you phase them out before you can let go of them, before you can adopt newer technologies? And how do you keep all those alive at some point in time? Because there has to be a certain period, but both the systems have to coexist at the same time. So these are the kind of challenges that the South Asia, Southeast Asia, Far East, Sub-Saharan Africa, etc., do not have to face. They simply don't have a legacy. And in this case, they just go to the market, look at the prevalent solutions out there, and go and implement it. So the legacy is the first one. Not having a legacy is a good thing over there.
Right, absolutely. So someone wanting to address that has to accept that, well, you're in the US and you've got a lot of legacy things and things that have been around and been a certain way for a while, and you can't just flip a switch and change it all.
10,000 financial institutions in the US, right? 10,000, the number may be something like 9,444, something like that. But, give or take 10,000. Changing and adapting, making them all be in sync with a new payment system is going to take a lot of time. There are going to be a lot of opinions. There are going to be a lot of vendors vying for it. There are going to be a lot of departments, state and federal, saying, hey, who has control over it, etc. So these are some of the challenges that the rest of the world simply doesn't have. A country may have, at best, 30 banks, 40 banks, 40 banks versus 9,000 banks, it just changes the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, kind of shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on P2P payments? We know that many millennials are using them, myself included. Do you think that this trend will continue and that they are absolutely the future?
So I wouldn't call it a trend. It sort of irks me a little when people say it's a trend. I think it's a necessity.
Sure.
It is as basic as being able to communicate. So whether they're millennials or not, Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, whatever you may want to call them, nomenclature and taxonomy notwithstanding here, this is a basic premise that will be inculcated with every person on earth eventually. If you have the freedom today to communicate with any person on earth, why is that freedom taken away when we talk about payments, which is something what we, for most of our adult life, we work for, right? So you should have the ability to exchange a monetary value with any person, just like you do with data. So I think this basic necessity will continue and will mature to the level that data is right now at.
Right, and it'll be continue to be supported by the technological advances, because it's the cat's out of the bag. This is what we need. This is the direction, right?
Yeah, and I think there'll be a lot of buyer side demand over here.
Absolutely. Just in my own personal life, it's made things like going out to a restaurant with a huge group of people. It's just completely changed how that used to be.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something about that, Scott. The first time I used bill splitting and I showed it amongst my friends, I was hesitant, very honestly. I wasn't a believer as such. It's like one of those things where, you're the kind of a dessert chef or a pastry chef that doesn't eat its own pie or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of those cases. But when I did use it for the very first time, I was like, oh my God, how did we live without it? How did we live without it? And today, I think it's just a hesitation factor. As more and more people get acclimatized to it, it's a natural extension of how payments are supposed to be done.
Yep. And it's like anything with technology, I mean, even stuff like GPS, when you're going to someplace you've never been, it's like, how did I live without this before? And then you realize how crucial it is. Mm-hmm. And that makes a ton of sense. Now, I'm curious, what do you think the biggest challenge folks working in the payments industry, banks, et cetera, are facing, right now in 2018, and how can they overcome that challenge?
I think identity is the first one. On a global scale, identity and the surety of with which you can say this person is who he or she says they are is a huge question mark. It all depends if your bank is willing to accept that system made in Bangladesh, that system made in Gambia or Zambia or in Manila. If you agree that that government's identity system is as robust and strong as your compliance or risk manual says it is. So a global identity is something we are missing. FYI, if you don't know, the current format that we use was made by a bank in Austria, Credit Austral, in 1918. So it's a 100-year-old template this year that we're using, the KYC. So identity is one. And the other thing is the ability to send real-time payments, micropayments. If I want to send you a hello on an instant message across the world, I can. I can IM you an instant message, a message that says hello, but I cannot send 5 cents to you across the world, wherever you are. It just doesn't exist today. So I think in small value payments that are real time and instant are missing, and identity is something that needs to be streamlined.
I recently had on the show a guy who works for a company that is focused on digital fraud prevention. And so this strikes me as one of those things that people also want to really keep an eye on and face this challenge of how do we transfer money so instantly and know who people are and do all that. And then also, combat those who would try to take advantage of things and commit fraud, right? So I'm curious, regulations of the industry obviously differ from country to country. We've covered how vastly different things can be. But can you talk about how the US regulatory system is different than that used by other countries? Can you maybe give us some examples of those differences that might surprise people who are only familiar with the US payment system? Are there any regulations, rules, or customs in international payments that you believe the US would benefit from adopting?
So the US, if you were to take again, I use the word knee jerk reaction, it would look very convoluted, look very complex, look very,
Hmm.
oh my God, kind of a system. The fact is, the US is an amalgamation of 54 different state regulators, 50 state regulators, one Washington, D.C., three territories,
Hmm.
and then there are federal regulations. So, because of all these issues, the licensing or keeping up with it, becomes inherently very, very difficult. There is no one single entity to say what they want to say. Every state is subject to its own interpretation of rules and how they roll them out, which is very, very difficult and different at times. Also, the most important thing is the cost of doing business in these states and cost of getting licenses. I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
In the UK, if you want to go and start a small payment institution, you pay, I think it's about £2,000, and off you go. Off you go. That's it. Yes, it takes about 4 to 6 months to get it approved. But with that £2,000, zero, there is no paid up capital requirement. You can be up and running as a payment institution. Yes, you're capped to 3 million euros a month, but that's a good enough number. If you want to do, let's say, establish a PayPal in Singapore, do you know what the cost is?
What's the cost?
Free. There is no cost.
Wow.
There's no license, actually. How's that? You can actually go in and just start a PayPal service. No license required. It is until and unless your net outstanding every night is more than $30 million, you don't need a license.
Wow.
And these territories then become a magnet for intellectual capital, for intellectual property, for fintech, gravitas, where they move into these places and say, hey, these are the places that are churning and putting out the right regulations, so that there's a catalyst effect that goes on. And this is something that the US is very slow on. It's not that it's not happening, it's just very slow. And with that slow and that behemoth that people from the outside have to chase and see, they say, you know what? Maybe we'll come back and revisit the United States later. Maybe we'll work in and set up outside because there's less inertia required. The US requires a lot of inertia, not only just in human capital, but in financial capital as well, to be able to work there. The rest of the world does not require that in most of the cases.
Right, right. That's fascinating. I mean, and that really is a big difference in a nutshell. And I can see how that can affect so many different things in the entire industry.
But there is a downside to it, because Canada, for example, is now following suit as to how the policies of the United States are set, and they say, let's mirror them, which basically means Canada is going to be the next US. It's going to be harder and more difficult to do business in Canada as far as the payment institutions outside Canada is concerned. So, one has to be very careful where that slider is going to be placed. You have to have the Goldilocks conditions, not too hot, not too cold, just right. And unfortunately, the slider or the Goldilocks conditions are not right when it comes to the US and Canada.
Hmm. Absolutely. Now, shifting gears again, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about this. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrencies? Do you see them having a solid future in payments, or are they purely a risky or volatile investment vehicle? What are your thoughts on them?
So I think it's inevitable, is the word I used. They are inevitable. Whether or not the current ones are going to be here for long, I don't know. They will have a role to play. I think they will help design version one of the crypto payment networks and payment systems, the decentralized systems, etc. But think about this thing. We are so worried about banking and how banking will play out. Banking is a phenomenon that's only 600 years old. Only 600 years old. There was no banking before that, but there was humanity before it. So the question to ask is what happens after banking finishes? But you might raise your eyebrows and say, well, why would banking finish? Well, it's
That's
only,
what I'm thinking, right? Yeah.
but why? It's only 600 years old, right? Obsolescence will set in. You
Hmm.
know, at some point in time, some guy thought, the buggy whip will never go out of fashion. I will still be making them. He's not making them anymore. So
Hmm.
I think cryptocurrencies definitely have a role. They are the money 3.0. That's what I like to call them. That's the new level of money, and or 4.0, however you want to count it. But that is where cryptocurrencies will play a role. And we are in a old money versus new money fighting kind of a stage right now. But I think eventually we will get acclimatized and settled and conform to the cryptocurrency world.
For sure. I've never really thought about it like that, and the age of banking being so young in terms of human history. So that's a really, really interesting point there. So I think this is connected to cryptocurrencies, and we've kind of been dancing around this. Technology has disrupted and continues to disrupt so many aspects of payments, how financial institutions operate, and consumer behavior. What are your thoughts at a high level on fintech? Are we headed towards more simplicity as we have more tools, or we just don't know? Where are we heading?
It's a great question, by the way, and one that I had to really think about when you had sent me this question earlier. The thing that I would like to say is, I'd like to take reference from how the data world is structuring now. We were in a decentralized world, we were in a broadcast world before that, we were in a centralized world, and today we are going towards a decentralized world. And not just going to a decentralized world, but we are also going to a decentralized, I can own and command how my data is used, how my personal data is used. That's where you see the European laws coming in, the privacy laws, etc. I think if we were to juxtapose that sort of a advancement to how payments are working, I think we'll see a more decentralized payments arena,
Hmm.
and these fintech companies would be the drivers for it. I think we will see more control of our money. If a bank makes a mistake with our money, the bankers just get a fine, but we don't get the money that we've lost.
Right.
Do you see the irony in that statement? So I think we need more control of our money, and with that, we need to understand that the laws and the rules need to change as to how we store, move, capture, pay, receive our own money, and who can do it and who cannot. Right now, the laws are very archaic, and it is really like trying to make a donkey cart fly, and you put wings
Yeah.
on it, you're putting an engine on it. At the end of the day, it's still a donkey cart. So the rules really need to change. But I think for sure, fintech players are the ones that are making us think in that direction and making us reevaluate and take a step back and re-examine of how and where we are with respect to money and how things can look better. Email was something, Hotmail was the thing
Hmm.
until Gmail came along, until Yahoo came along, until everyone else came along, right? So things evolve. And I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the evolution, and I think fintech are the drivers here.
Absolutely. So we have a segment that we like to end with where we do a fast 5 questions rapid fire. Are you ready?
Absolutely, sir. Drum roll.
All right. Make a prediction about the future of payments that you expect will happen in the next 1 to 4 years.
I think I said micropayments, the ability to
Hmm.
send small value across the world in almost real time, just like you can send a WhatsApp immediately, the picture or the image or the message gets there. We will be able to send money across the world to the other person in real time for a fraction of the fee.
Love it. What's one cool piece of payment related technology or fintech that you've come across recently that particularly impressed you?
Definitely the distributed ledger technology, the blockchain, right? I mean, the ability that I control my own money in my own wallet, and I am my own kingdom and my treasurer, and I can send it wherever I want instantly. The ability, if you ever do a transaction on the Ethereum network, it has
Hmm.
got to move you. How you can send hundreds of thousands of dollars for pennies, and it's instant almost. That is the beauty that really, really impresses me.
In the next 5 years, most people globally will make a purchase with either Bitcoin, Apple Pay, Google Pay, some other thing. Which one and why?
Most likely not Apple, not Google, maybe Bitcoin, but I think it'll probably be one of the newer currencies. It won't be one, it'll be regional. The Chinese would
Mhm.
prefer their own, the APAC region would prefer their own, South America, Latin America would prefer their own, Americas would have their own, the European Union will have their own, but all these currencies will be able to talk to each other seamlessly. It'll be a crypto based derivative for sure.
Mhm. What's one piece of advice you have for someone who's considering the payments industry as a career?
Oh, this is a tough one. A lot of people will, I mean, the technology, understanding how things work, understanding how, debit and credit and this and that. I always say spend a little time in learning the basic fundamentals, how banking came into being, how ledgers are set up, how money is transferred in the world just by using books. There is no physical movement of money per se. Go back to the fundamentals and go learn and read up on them. Actually, YouTube is a classical case where you can do this in what I call an accelerated learning mechanism, right? You can watch videos and so forth,
Yes,
and also learn a little bit about the law. If you spend a little bit of time learning the law, I think you will do yourself a lot of good because you will understand, what is possible and what is not as per law.
absolutely. I think that's a good piece of advice right there for sure. Last one. What's the best business advice you've ever received, and from whom did you receive it?
So it was from my teacher, someone who mentored me when I switched my careers at the age of 40. And he said, listen, focus. Just focus, focus, focus. And you've heard this so many times. He said, no, you need to focus so much that when anyone in this field is going to be thinking about this problem that comes under your focused umbrella, they will think of you because your name comes up. And the way to focus is persistency. A river cuts through rock not because it is powerful, it cuts through it because it is persistent. You need to be absolutely persistent day in and day out of what your focus area is and where you sort of put your practice to it.
I love it. Before I let you go here, can you remind our listeners again how they can get in contact with you, learn more, read up on some of the things you've talked about and things like that?
So I have 9,000 articles on the internet. Most of them are found on Quora, where about I think 5,000, and I think the remaining 4,000 are on my blog. My name, Faisal, last name Khan, Khan, FaisalKhan.com. That's where you go. If you need to reach to me, it's my initials, FK at FaisalKhan.com. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, probably every other social media thing out there. I'm very easy to get a hold of. So love to chat, love to talk.
Love it. Faisal, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me. This has really been fascinating.
Thank you very much, and I, wish you the very best for your podcast. And we'll maybe touch base on the 100th episode or the 200th episode, and where you could be telling your success story.
Absolutely. I'd love it. So that's it for our interview today, which means that it is time to award our Small Business Organization of the Week. Each and every episode, we want to highlight business groups and organizations doing great work advancing the interests of entrepreneurs and small businesses, helping business people connect, being positive influences in their local communities, and more. And these organizations are nominated by you, our listeners. So if you ever think of one you think deserves to be highlighted, don't hesitate to let us know. Send an email to scott@soarpay.com and we may just mention it. But for this week, we are happy to recognize the Arizona Small Business Association, or ASBA. The mission of the Arizona Small Business Association is to be the statewide resource for small businesses. Business owners join ASBA for the convenience and efficiency of their products and services, to engage and advocate for public policy that ignites small business growth, and to foster a positive economic direction for Arizona that's powered by entrepreneurialism. By bringing thousands of small businesses together, ASBA has created greater value for all members and is proof positive that their mission of supporting small businesses through an active and connected community is working. They do this by focusing their efforts on 4 areas of small business: effective small business education, dynamic professional connections, support resources, and public policy. Their focus on helping small businesses in Arizona makes them a fantastic organization to highlight here. And if you'd like to learn more, you can visit them at asba.com. Huge congrats to them on their selection. So that completes our show today. Thanks so much for listening. And don't forget to subscribe if you like the show. You can do so on iTunes, Google Play, and many other platforms. So until next time, I'll see you then. And thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to another episode of PayPod, brought to you by Soar Payments. Soar Payments is a leading merchant services provider for e-commerce, high-risk, and hard-to-place businesses. If you'd like to get the latest PayPod episodes sent to you automatically, subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher, or visit soarpay.com/podcast.